back. Since we have basically finished with topic sentences and all of that, and we're pretty much done with commas, you can expect that we're going to have a quiz coming up for the commas, and we'll be moving on from topic sentences as well. So now we're going to get on to the next part of the paragraph after you have your topic sentences, which is, of course, going to be the body of your paragraph. So that is the portion of that's the portion of the paragraph we're going to be talking about now. But first, before we start with that, we are going to look at the homework from last week, or the week before, I forget. But we're going to be moving on to that now. So we're going to review the homework from the book that I had you submit most recently. So the first part of the homework was to put the paragraph, the commas into the paragraph in the book on page 61. So I have the paragraph written here with all the commas in red, but they might be a little hard to see, so I have this fancy little laser pointer to point out where they are. We're just going to go through the paragraph and explain where all the commas are and why they are there. So, start off. Because Malaysia and Thailand are located next to each other, there's our first comma here. We might conclude that these two nations share many similarities. This is an example of a comma that's used for subordination because our first sentence here is the first part of the sentence, because Malaysia and Thailand are located next to each other. This is a subordinate clause. So we have a subject, Malaysia and Thailand, and a verb, are, but this first clause here, because Malaysia and Thailand are located next to each other, is not a complete sentence. And that's combined with an independent clause. We might conclude that these two nations share many similarities. That is a complete sentence with a subject, we, and a verb, might conclude. And because the subordinate clause comes before the independent clause, we need to put a comma after the subordinate clause. Right. To a certain extent, this conclusion is true, with another comma again here. So this one has a comma because it is an introductory phrase, to a certain extent. That is a prepositional phrase located at the beginning of a sentence before the subject. So in those cases, you have a comma for an introductory word or phrase. Next one, for example, both countries have temperate climates throughout the year. Again, this is another example of an introductory phrase. For example, Thailand's economy is growing, and so is Malaysia's. This one might be a little harder because the second sentence does not have a traditional subject the way you typically think of it, but this is a sentence where we have a comma that's used because of fanboys. This is a sentence combining two independent clauses using a coordinating conjunction. So the sentence, Thailand's economy is growing, is a complete thought with a subject and a verb, and this construction, so is, replaces the verb of the sentence before it. So what that means is that Malaysia's economy is growing as well. And so that completes that combines the two sentences. Thailand's economy is growing, and so is Malaysia's. Next sentence, in addition, Malaysia has many miles of beautiful beaches that attract tourists, and Thailand does too. This has two commas, one for after in addition, which is an introductory phrase, and one between the two complete sentences. Malaysia has many miles of beautiful beaches that attract tourists, and the sentence, Thailand does too. So this is an introductory phrase and a fanboys comma. Then, however, there are also several important differences. This has another comma after however because it's an introductory word. But in general, as I've mentioned before, you almost always have a comma after however, regardless of where it appears, because it's almost always used as an introductory word, or it's used to combine two sentences in subordination. Our next sentence, Malaysians and Thais speak completely different languages. no comma here. The population of Malaysia is about 29 million, but the population of Thailand is about 69 million. So here, another comma because of the use of the coordinating conjunction, but to combine the two sentences, the population of Malaysia is about 29 million, and the sentence, the population of Thailand is about 69 million. Thailand has a national king, but Malaysia does not. Again, this is a fanboys comma. Finally, Malaysia was a British colony, but Thailand was never a British colony. Here I forgot to put a space. Don't pay any attention to that. And we have two commas here for one finally with an introductory word, and then here with a coordinating conjunction. Thus, the fact that two countries are near each other does not always mean they are similar. Here we have one last comma after thus, which is another one of our introductory words. The next part is Activity 9 from page 63. So we're going to go through all of these sentences and see if they are fragments, and if they are, figure out some way to repair the error. So, let's start off with our first one. Because the wind and rain were so incredibly strong between noon and 4 p.m. yesterday. This is a sentence fragment because you don't have anything after the subordinate clause, which is because the wind and rain were so incredibly strong between noon and 4 p.m. yesterday. If we had removed because here, gotten rid of that, then this would be a complete sentence, but because the word because is at the beginning of the sentence, this makes it a subordinate clause. So one way to prepare that would just be to add a independent clause before or after it. This example here, because the wind and rain were so incredibly strong between noon and 4 p.m. yesterday, we stayed inside. That makes this a complete thought. It says what we did because the wind and rain, blah, blah, blah. If we put the independent clause before the subordinate clause, then we don't need a comma to combine the two, because when you have when you have two sentences combined using subordination, you only add a comma if the subordinate clause is first. Although the price of gasoline is extremely high, people just complain and pay the high prices. This is correct. It's a complete thought with a subject and a verb, so there's no issue here and no need to make any changes. In order to cash a check at a bank where you do not have an account and no one there knows you. This is a sentence fragment. It doesn't describe what exactly you have to do to be able to cash a check at a bank where you do not have an account and no one there knows you. So we need to add something after or before to complete the sentence. So this is the one I did. In order to cash a check at a bank where you do not have an account and no one there knows you, you need to bring in your ID and pay a fee. Again, you can add that either before or after, so you can also say you need to bring your ID and pay a fee in order to cash a check at a bank where you do not have an account, blah, blah, blah. And then, again, the only difference is if you put the independent clause first, then you don't need a comma to combine the two sentences. Next one. Of course, the main ingredient that you need to have in order to make chicken soup is chicken. So this is complete, and it's perfectly correct just the way it is, so no changes are needed here. For some teachers, a sentence fragment is a very serious type of mistake because it shows a lack of understanding of what a sentence is. This is, again, complete and correct. Although the economic forecast for the housing market does not contain any especially bright news for those who wish to buy a house in the near future. This is a sentence fragment. It introduces one part of the sentence, but because of the word although, it makes it an incomplete thought because it suggests that there should be more information that tells you something that contrasts with the first part of the sentence. And so to complete that, I added the complete sentence, many people are purchasing properties. And again, you only need the comma to combine the two if you put the independent clause first. When the vice president was sworn in as the new number 2 person in the country, her husband and her children, as well as her grandchildren, attended the ceremony. This is complete, and no changes are needed. Now moving on to Activity 10. Their sentences either contain sentence errors or don't, and you need to figure out some way to fix the sentence fragment, the run-on, or the comma splice. I forgot what this was exactly for a little bit, but I remembered now. Okay, so this one, yesterday's weather caused problems for many travelers. Most of the flights were canceled due to the torrential rains and high winds. So this contains a sentence fragment, and it's specifically this sentence here. Due to the torrential rains and high winds. This is not a complete sentence. It lacks a verb. So because that sentence does not have a verb, it is a fragment. And then to fix the error, all you really need to do is delete the period and uncapitalize do, and then everything's fine, because now the sentence containing the phrase due to the torrential rains and high winds has a verb, were, canceled. All right. Computer programs can help students learn a foreign language. Many students use the language programs in the computer center. This is a comma splice because it's combining two complete sentences using only a comma, which is incorrect. You need either to separate both sentences with a period, or you need some kind of coordinating conjunction, or some other kind of conjunction to be able to put the sentences together correctly. So to fix this, what I did was I just added the conjunction so to make this no longer a comma splice. It was definitely a nervous time for many people. When we had the economic crisis, prices and unemployment soared. The government did everything possible to make sure the people did not panic. That's particularly relevant now, but not the important part. This sentence is correct. Each of the sentences are combined correctly, and all of them are complete. So this one did not need to be changed. Dancing with the Stars is an internationally known television show. The dancing is very exciting. Again, this is incorrect because it's combining two complete sentences using only a comma, and we know that we need some kind of conjunction to combine two sentences, and depending on what kind of conjunction we use, we also need to add a comma. So that's one way that the sentence could be fixed, is by adding a conjunction. Another option is to just make the sentences separate entirely by adding a period. We could, for example, say, Dancing with the Stars is an internationally known television show because the dancing is very exciting. In that case, the appropriate way to handle that in terms of punctuation would be to replace the comma with the word because. So you would not say, Dancing with the Stars is an internationally well-known television show, comma, because the dancing is very exciting. So if you use because, you don't need a comma at all, but you can also separate the two sentences completely, which is also fine. This magazine won several awards last year for the content and the style of its stories. The last issue had 2 superb short stories that were written by distinguished authors. This sentence, or this problem, I guess, whatever you want to call it, has a sentence fragment error right here for the content and the style of its stories. So this is just a prepositional phrase. It doesn't have a verb or anything like that. So in order to fix that, you can simply combine the first 2 sentences by deleting the period and again making for lowercase. So the correct version of these sentences would look like this. Here. Okay. Lázaro Cárdenas was the president of Mexico from 1934 to 1940. His original goal was to become a teacher. The political situation in Mexico at the time caused him to change his mind. Here we have a run-on sentence, which is actually this here. There are two complete sentences that are just all shoved together into one sentence with nothing at all to combine them, which makes it different than a comma splice, which is which is when two sentences are combined inappropriately using only a comma. So, in order to fix the error, one solution could be to use a comma and a coordinating conjunction, so that the run-on sentence would read, his original goal was to become a teacher, but the political situation in Mexico at that time caused him to change his mind. Another option is to just separate those two sentences completely with a period, making 3 sentences instead of 2. Right. So our next one, despite all the extremely depressing news that we recently heard from that part of the world. This has a subordinate clause in it, but it does not contain an independent clause, which we need to be able to have a complete thought. So, all this needs really is an independent clause to make the whole thing complete. Despite all of the extremely depressing news that we recently heard from that part of the world, we all... I wrote a mistake here, so don't copy this. We all found a way to be happy, is what I meant to write. I included the word need here for some reason. Pretend that's not there. Right, so that is activity 10 from the homework. So that's all the answers for the homework. Again, you could fix a lot of those errors in a bunch of different ways. You didn't need to have my answers exactly, but those are just some examples of how you could fix those errors and an explanation of why those things in those sentences were, in fact, errors. So now we're going to move on from that to start discussing body sentences, which is the main portion of your paragraph. We've talked about topic sentences so far, which are just the first sentence, but now we need to start to discuss body sentences, which is most of your paragraph, which is the part in the middle. So we're going to start there. So the function of a body sentence is to provide more information about another sentence in the paragraph. There are 2 different kinds of body sentences, which make up the majority of the paragraph you have. What determines the 2 kinds of body sentences is what sentence the particular body sentence gives more information about. So, when you have a body sentence that gives more information about the topic sentence, this is called a supporting sentence. But when you have a sentence that gives more information about another one of the supporting sentences, we call that a detail sentence. This is just a way to help you think about how different kinds of sentences in a paragraph might be slightly different from each other in terms of their function. And we'll get to see some examples of what makes a supporting sentence different from a detail sentence. So you don't need to worry about that if you don't understand everything perfectly just yet. We will get there, I promise. In general, you want to think about the paragraph, the structure of a paragraph in terms of a sandwich, which may sound ridiculous, but they actually have quite a lot in common, which we'll again get to a little bit more in a second. So for people that aren't very familiar with writing paragraphs, this is something that's common to pretty much everyone, is the way you build the sandwich is a lot like the structure you have for a paragraph. So, the ideal paragraph is going to be structured a lot like a sandwich is. because sandwiches need to have ingredients in a certain order. So, for example, every sandwich by definition has to have bread on the top and the bottom and meat in the middle, or it has to have some kind of filling in the middle. Paragraphs are a lot like that. So, in a sandwich, you need to have a piece of bread at the top. This is basically your topic sentence. Every paragraph needs to have a topic sentence, otherwise it's not really a paragraph. Just like if you don't have a piece of bread on the top, you don't really have a sandwich. You also need to have a piece of bread at the bottom of your sandwich. So this is the same as your concluding sentence at the end of the paragraph. Again, this is something we'll talk a little bit more about later on, discussing concluding sentences. Mostly we've been focusing on topic sentences, and now we're moving on to the body sentences. So, for a sandwich, in the middle, between the two pieces of bread, you need meat. So these are going to be your, the meat part of the sandwich specifically is going to be your supporting sentences. These are the ones that provide more information about the topic. And those are the absolutely essential parts of not only a sandwich, but a paragraph as well. So, you can make a sandwich with only 2 pieces of bread and some meat in the middle. You might say that's not a very good sandwich, but that still does count as a sandwich. Just the same, you can have a paragraph with a topic sentence and a concluding sentence and only supporting sentences. But if you want to have extras in your sandwich, you can add things like lettuce and tomatoes and cheese to make it more full, to give it more flavor. You can say the same about a paragraph. So the things like your lettuce, tomatoes, and cheese are going to be detail sentences which support the supporting sentences. And the supporting sentences give more information about the topic. So that might help make it a little more clear how a supporting sentence is different from a detail sentence. But the important thing is every paragraph needs a topic sentence, a concluding sentence, and supporting sentences, just like every sandwich needs bread at the top, bread at the bottom, and meat in the middle. So, to sort of demonstrate what this looks like with an actual paragraph, we're going to look at one of the example paragraphs out of the book. So example paragraph 21, titled A Great Tourist Destination. I don't remember the page number exactly, but it's in chapter 4 of the book. It's the first paragraph. We're going to look at this paragraph one sentence at a time to see what each sentence does and what its role in the paragraph is. So the first sentence in this paragraph, titled A Great Tourist Destination, says, New York and Boston attract millions of tourists, but I think one of the best cities to visit on the East Coast of the United States is Washington, D.C. When you read a paragraph, after every sentence, at least when you start getting more comfortable with reading paragraphs and writing your own paragraphs, you should ask yourself, what kind of sentence is this, and what does the sentence do? So, in our first sentence of this paragraph, we need to ask, what kind of sentence is this? So this is going to be a topic sentence, right? One of the pieces of bread in our sandwich. And so, if we recall from our discussion about topic sentences, the topic sentence has 2 parts. One, it identifies a topic, and then it also has a controlling idea. So the topic of this paragraph is Washington, D.C., because all of the sentences later on, we haven't gotten there yet, but you'll see these are all in relation to Washington, D.C. And the controlling idea, right, what everything says, what every sentence in the paragraph says about the topic, Washington, D.C., is what makes Washington, D.C. the best city to visit on the East Coast. So now that we've identified the topic and controlling idea of our first sentence, we can move on to the next one. It has some of the most interesting landmarks and tourist spots in the country. Again, we need to ask, what kind of sentence is this? This one is going to be a supporting sentence. So from our sandwich earlier, this is going to be one of the pieces of meat. We'll say it's turkey. Pretend it's a turkey sandwich, even if it's not. Right? This is a supporting sentence because of what the sentence actually does in the paragraph. So if we look at the sentence and really think about what its purpose in the paragraph is, we see that it gives a reason why Washington, D.C. is one of the best cities to visit. It mentions that it has interesting landmarks and has lots of things for tourists to do in Washington, D.C. So that's giving a reason why the author of this paragraph thinks D.C. is one of the best places to visit on the East Coast. Our next sentence: there are many monuments to visit, such as the Lincoln Memorial, the Jefferson Memorial, the Washington Monument, and the Washington Monument, which is the tallest building in Washington. So this is another one of the body sentences, but again, we always want to ask, what kind of sentence is this? This is actually a detail sentence, or let's pretend a piece of lettuce. The purpose of this sentence is different than the purpose of the sentence before it. What this sentence does is give specific examples of tourist spots and landmarks in Washington, D.C., which is identified as one of the reasons that D.C. is one of the best places in the country to visit on the East Coast. So, just to sort of summarize, the sentence before this, the supporting sentence, gives a reason that D.C. is one of the best places to visit. Right, it says that it's one of the best places to visit because of the landmarks and tourist spots. The next sentence, this one underlined here, gives examples of what those tourist spots and landmarks are. So that's how the functions of these two sentences are different. And that's what makes the first sentence a supporting sentence and the second sentence a detail sentence. For more excitement, the area called Georgetown in northwest Washington is famous for its shopping and restaurants. So this is going to be another supporting sentence, right? Another slice of turkey. This provides another reason that D.C. is one of the best cities on the East Coast to visit. So in addition to the interesting landmarks and tourist spots, Georgetown has famous shopping and restaurants for people to do while they're visiting. So this is support for the topic sentence instead of more information and more detail about a supporting sentence. Finally, there is the White House tour. This is one of our supporting sentences, so again, another slice of turkey. And the function is the same as the other two, so it has a third and final reason why D.C. is one of the best places in the U.S. to visit, specifically because of the White House tour. On this tour, the guide leads visitors as they walk through many of the rooms in the White House and view the home of the President of the United States. So this is one of our other detail sentences. So we'll pretend instead of another piece of lettuce, this is a tomato instead. All right, so the purpose of this sentence is to provide more detail about the White House tour. For example, we may not know why exactly the White House tour is such a great thing for people to visit D.C. for. So the next sentence describes what the tour is like to more clearly describe to the reader what makes the White House tour a reason to go to visit Washington, D.C. And because this sentence supports one of the supporting sentences, that makes it a detail sentence instead of a supporting sentence. Although Washington, D.C. does not have the large number of visitors that New York or Boston does, I think this city is one of the best destinations for tourists. So this is a concluding sentence, right? Our piece of bread at the bottom of the sandwich. And the function of this sentence is just to summarize the main idea of the paragraph. So essentially what a concluding sentence does is reiterate the message of the topic sentence using slightly different words. If you look at the concluding sentence, although Washington, D.C. does not have the large number of visitors that New York or Boston does, I think this city is one of the best destinations for tourists. And then you compare that to the topic sentence, New York and Boston attract millions of tourists, but I think one of the best cities to visit on the East Coast of the United States is Washington, D.C. You have slightly different wording for these two sentences, but they convey the same idea. They essentially mean the same thing. So what this does, right, it summarizes the main idea of the paragraph, and it brings the paragraph to a logical sort of ending. If we tried to end the sentence without the conclusion, we would just end with an explanation of what the White House tour is, but that doesn't in any way signal to the reader that we have more information to tell them about why DC is one of the best places for people to visit. So that's another purpose of a concluding sentence, is to let the reader know, basically, that the paragraph is about to be over. So, again, think of this like if you left off the bottom piece of bread on a sandwich, it would be completely ruined. It's the same way for a paragraph. If you don't have an appropriate ending, then your reader is going to be confused or unsatisfied with the paragraph. Another thing to talk about, which I've mentioned before, is the concept of unrelated sentences. So it's important to remember that every sentence in the paragraph needs to give more information about the topic, right? So it needs to be a supporting sentence, which gives more information about the topic sentence, or it needs to be a detail sentence explaining in more detail a supporting sentence. On the next slide, I'm going to give an example of the paragraph we just read, but I'm going to add some unrelated sentences to the paragraph to show you how that kind of disrupts the way a paragraph should read. So I'm going to run through this a little more quickly. New York and Boston attract millions of tourists, but I think one of the best cities to visit on the East Coast of the United States is Washington, D.C. It has some of the most interesting landmarks and tourist spots in the country. There are many monuments to visit, such as the Lincoln Memorial, the Jefferson Memorial, and the Washington Monument, which is the tallest building in Washington. My cousin Arnold is from Washington, and he says it's really nice. For more excitement, the area called Georgetown in Northwest Washington, is famous for its shopping and restaurants. Finally, there is the White House tour. On this tour, the guide leads visitors as they walk through many of the rooms in the White House and view the home of the President of the United States. If you don't like the current president, it may be best to delay your visit until the United States has a better one. Although Washington, D.C. does not have the large number of visitors that New York or Boston does, I think this city is one of the best destinations for tourists. The two sentences that I've added, which have nothing to do with the topic at all, are highlighted here in blue. So my cousin Arnold is from Washington, and he says it's really nice. This is vaguely related to the idea that the paragraph is about Washington, D.C., and that it's one of the best cities to visit, but this doesn't actually provide a reason. This sentence is more about Arnold and his opinion of Washington, but that's not the purpose of the paragraph. The purpose of the paragraph is to provide reasons that Washington, D.C. is one of the best cities to visit on the East Coast, and that's not what this sentence does. Because it doesn't contribute to that goal, it is an unrelated sentence. The next sentence, if you don't like the current president, it may be best to delay your visit until the United States has a better one. This, again, is unrelated. It provides unnecessary commentary about personal views about the President of the United States rather than describing the White House tour or giving a reason to visit Washington, D.C. So these are really distracting from the actual purpose of the paragraph, and they really disrupt the way a paragraph should be written. So even if the unrelated sentences seem like they are in some way relevant to the topic or the controlling idea, or maybe that they are in some way related to a supporting sentence, that doesn't mean that they belong in the paragraph. That's why it's so important when you read each sentence, you need to think about, one, what kind of sentence is it, and does it do what this kind of sentence is supposed to, and two, if the sentence is related and whether it serves an appropriate purpose. So if you read each sentence and really think about what the sentence does, it will be able to help you determine if the sentence actually belongs in the paragraph. Because the purpose of these two sentences here don't contribute to either developing the main idea expressed in the topic sentence, and they don't contribute to providing more detail about supporting sentences, they should not be included in the paragraph. And so that's basically just this information again. When you include sentences in a paragraph that don't give more information about the topic or supporting sentences, they don't belong there. And so, another analogy with our sandwich is that when you have unrelated sentences in a paragraph, that's like putting a glass of milk in your sandwich. Right? Nobody wants to eat a sandwich that looks like this. It completely ruins the paragraph. It completely ruins your sandwich if you have a glass of milk in there. So, it's always important in a paragraph to think about not only what kind of sentence it is you're writing, but once you have the sentence in the paragraph, you need to think and ask yourself, what does this sentence do? Does it give more information about the topic sentence? And does it give more information about a supporting sentence? If the answer to both of those questions is no, then you don't need to have that sentence in your paragraph. Otherwise, you're putting a glass of milk in a sandwich. Right? So, that's all I have for this week. Again, just as a reminder, there will be more. We will be having a quiz coming up on commas and comma splices, run-ons, stuff like that. So keep an eye out for that, and then I will be posting some homework out of the book and more things like that for you to work on as well. So make sure you're checking Blackboard, and remember, don't pour a glass of milk in a sandwich, because unrelated sentences don't belong in paragraphs. Okay? So, thanks for watching, and make sure you're checking Blackboard regularly. Bye.